So here's something that I wanted to talk about. So Steven Crowder has a position which he says that basically man-made climate change isn't real, and he will essentially fight to the death to prove that that is true. He's done a video that I believe was like debunking 5 global warming myths, and Potholer just ripped it to complete shreds. So I recommend you check out Potholer's videos because he literally ripped Steven Crowder to shreds. It's unbelievably bad. So I recommend you go check out those videos. But here's something interesting. So I want you guys to check out this clip. It is Steven Crowder bringing on this climate scientist. His name is Dr. Patrick Moore. And he's gonna preface the whole conversation. I want you guys to see that preface because it's he's really excited to have this guy on because the common thing that people who talk about climate change are, they say, 97% of scientists agree. And I'm going to talk about that. But check this out. Let's come back and talk about it.
Have our next guest on. He's been like my white whale. I have been chasing him, but he's a busy man. And he's a busy man because sometimes the people with the PhDs are. Do you have his Twitter? Do you have his Twitter up there?
We do have his Twitter.
His Twitter is EcoSense Now, at EcoSense Now. When it's not their actual name, I always have a problem remembering it. But he was one of the original members of Greenpeace. PhD in ecology, if I'm not mistaken. Dr. Patrick Moore, thank you for being on the show, sir.
Great to be with you, Stephen.
Well, we're always glad to have a dissident on the program. So for people who may not be familiar with you, first off, I want to make sure I'm getting all of this right at the top. You have a PhD in ecology, correct?
That is right. And actually, when I started my PhD in ecology, the word was not yet in the popular press. It was a word that really nobody knew. The word environment had started to come into use, but ecology, which was up until then an obscure branch of the life sciences of biology, only became popularized just around when I got my PhD and afterwards, of course.
Okay, so to be clear, you would be considered a scientist, and would it be considered a science relevant to the environment and climate?
Well, the reason that ecology is so relevant to the climate issue is it is an interdisciplinary subject. Ecology is about the relationships among all the different factors in the environment, the atmosphere, the ocean, the earth, the sun, the planets, etc. So you can make it as big or small as you want. You can look at the ecology of a microcosm, like a small lake, or you can look at the ecology of the whole earth, or out into the universe.
Sure.
So the issue of people keep talking about climate science. There's no such thing as climate science in the sense that climate science is a whole array of different disciplines interacting. You've got meteorology, you've got atmospheric chemistry and atmospheric physics, you've got astrophysics and the sun, you've got oceanography, you've got the whole terrestrial biosphere with all the forests and the crops and the soils, and rocks and all the ice on the poles. And all of those things are interacting with each other in ways that we don't understand perfectly, but we're gaining more and more insight into it as time goes on.
Okay, well, I just wanted to clarify. You would be more of a scientist in this field than, say, someone with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. I just want to make sure that it seems as though...
Yes, but I don't discount the layperson even studying this thoroughly and having a good mind to analyze the information.
Exactly.
You don't have to be a PhD to understand the basics of the situation, in particular to understand how much uncertainty there is in this subject, rather than the whole science is settled dogma. That's just intellectual laziness, I suppose, to just say the argument's over.
Well, exactly.
So they don't have to talk about it.
Well, you understand the reason I bring this up, and I talked about this I said, listen, Bill Nye is not an atmospheric scientist. He's not an ecologist. He may be a great mechanical engineer. Now, my only issue is
He's not, by the way. He's pretty filled at that.
Is he pretty bad?
He hated his job. That's why he left for comedy.
It was very clear during the Fukushima situation that he didn't understand some of the very basics of nuclear physics, for example.
Right. Well, neither do I, but I'm an idiot. But I assume he is as well. Him and I are in good company. But here's the reason I bring this up is because I know people are going to try and discredit you and this very interview saying, well, he's not insert XYZ. And my point is anyone can have an opinion, but people like Bill Nye, they will use the argument against someone like me who doesn't have a bachelor's in any kind of scientific field, saying, well, listen, I'm the science guy. So for people out there listening, this guy is as much of the science guy as anybody out there. Something else too, before we get into some, I would like to get into some of the nitty gritty because I'm very compelled by your arguments, and I think a lot of people haven't heard them. But were you one of the founding members or one of the original members of the environmental activist group Greenpeace? Tell people about that.
All right, so there's a pretty big issue with this guy, Dr. Patrick Moore. So he talks about Greenpeace a lot, and everyone talks about it. Greenpeace is this organization that is about the environment, and they wrote a statement on their website back in 2010. I'm going to read part of it to you guys. The headline reads, Greenpeace statement on Patrick Moore. Again, this is on July 6, 2010. Because obviously they were getting mentioned so much, I guess, that they wanted to write a response. So here's what they said. It starts out saying, Patrick Moore often misrepresents himself in the media as an environmental expert or even an environmentalist, while offering anti-environmental opinions on a wide range of issues and taking a distinctly anti-environmental stance. He also exploits long-gone ties with Greenpeace to sell himself as a speaker and a pro-corporate spokesperson, usually taking positions that Greenpeace opposes. It says, while it is true that Patrick Moore was a member of Greenpeace in the 1970s, in 1986 he abruptly turned his back on the very issues he once passionately defended. He claims he, quote, saw the light, but what Moore really saw was an opportunity for financial gain. Since then, he has gone from defender of the planet to a paid representative of corporate polluters. Remember, this is Greenpeace's statement on him. This is the group that he often mentions to sort of give himself these stripes as this environmentalist guy. And it goes on to say, by exploiting his former ties to Greenpeace, Moore portrays himself as a prodigal son who has seen the error of his ways. Unfortunately, the media, especially conservative media, give him a platform for his views and often do so without mentioning the fact that he is a paid spokesperson for polluting companies. And then they go on to say, they have this little thing, it says truth versus fiction on Patrick Moore. And this is a very important part. It says Patrick Moore claims he is an environmentalist and represents an independent scientific perspective on forest issues. Truth, Moore was paid by the British Columbia Forest Alliance, an industry front group set up by the public relations firm Burson Marsteller, the same PR firm that represented Exxon after the Valdez oil spill and Union Carbide after the Bhopal chemical disaster. The BC Forest Alliance is funded primarily by the logging industry. He also has ties to other corporations, including Monsanto. It says, according to Moore, logging is good for forests, causing reforestation, not deforestation. So that stuff, it gets into the main point here, which is that, first of all, he's sort of using Greenpeace as this thing that's supposed to give him the street cred as being this environmentalist. But really what it is basically he started out actually giving a fuck, who was actually, I guess, pro-environment, and then he saw the light, the opportunity for making a crap ton of money. So he writes these he writes these studies that are supposedly peer-reviewed, although there was a little bit of an alarm that went off about whether or not they were doing legitimate practices of peer review. But this place is called the Frontier Center for Public Policy. Now, when it comes to tracking down the funding for these kinds of groups, it gets really, really confusing because they have a lot of like offshoots and things that fund these things. But here's this thing that explains it. So there's a donation of $25,000 from the Heartland Institute in 2007, which is it's a conservative place institute. And then this is something that is interesting. So here it says, Desmog blog notes that FCPP received $633,000 from the Aurea Foundation in 2009. The Aurea Foundation was founded by Peter Monk, the head of Barrick Gold, and is a major funder of small but influential network of free market think tanks in Canada, including the Fraser Institute, the Atlantic Institute for Market Studies, the Frontier Center for Public Policy, the Montreal Economic Institute, and the MacDonald Laurier Institute. It says publicly available data from the Canada Revenue Agency reports that the Frontier Center for Public Policy received a total of $1,722,000 from the Aurea Foundation between 07 and 14. So this is the Aurea Foundation, I guess, is one of the free market think tanks. So, and it's a major funder of those. So basically he writes these studies, which are supposedly peer-reviewed for this place. And the Fraser Institute, we know, is a complete libertarian sham. And the Fraser Institute gets a shit ton of funding from the Koch brothers. And so he also gets a bunch of funding from different things like Monsanto, and they talked about the deforestation. So here's something interesting that I want you guys to see. So there was something called glyphosate in the Monsanto weed killer that Patrick Moore claimed was actually safe to drink. I shit you not. He literally said that it was safe to drink. And let's see what he said when asked whether or not he would drink it.
I believe that glyphosate in Argentina is causing increases in cancer. You can drink a whole quart of it and it won't hurt you.
You want to drink some? We have some here.
I'd be happy to, actually, but not really, but
not really.
I know it wouldn't hurt me.
If you say so, I have some glyphosate.
No, I'm not stupid.
Okay, so you.
No, but I know
so it's dangerous,
I know. No, people try to commit suicide with it and fail fairly
let's
regularly.
Tell the truth.
It's not dangerous to humans. No, it's not.
So you're ready to drink one glass of glyphosate?
No, I'm not an idiot. Interview me about golden rice. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, then it's finished. Then the interview is finished.
That's a good way to solve things.
Yeah. You're a complete jerk.
Yeah, this guy is a massive fraud. As you can see, he made the claim that you could drink a quart of it and it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't hurt you at all. It wouldn't do any damage. It's totally safe. Despite making that statement, he refuses to drink it, literally making the statement, "I'm not an idiot," while also simultaneously claiming that the weed killer is just fine to drink. So the idea that this guy is any credible whatsoever when he's clearly been co-opted by corporations is laughable. It's utterly laughable. And I wish Steven Crowder had asked him about that instead. But here's the last thing that I want to say about this. This is very important, okay? Here's the thing. I want to make this clear. It is wholly irrelevant what the opinion of scientists is, or what the opinions of the scientists are. It's wholly irrelevant because the scientific method is not science is not determined by consensus of opinion of scientists. If that were the case, we'd be really screwed because corporations already buy out scientists, like we see with this guy, and Coca-Cola does it all the time. All these different companies do it because it helps them PR-wise, obviously. So think about it this way. Could you imagine a situation? That's not how science is. Science is not determined by polls of scientists to see what they think. Science is determined by data, scientific studies. So the fact that 97% of scientists agree that climate change is man-made is completely irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything. It's completely useless because I don't care what the scientists' opinion are. What matters is there was a new study that came out that said 99% of studies on climate change that gave an answer as to whether or not it was man-made said that yes, it is man-made. What matters is the studies, the actual data. The opinions of the scientist is wholly irrelevant. What matters is the data. So it's not the consensus of the scientist's opinion. It's the consensus of the data that is produced by factual evidence through the scientific method that the scientists have made. So it does not matter what the opinions of scientists are, and I really hope that less people start using that argument, because saying that 97% of scientists agree on climate change doesn't mean anything. What matters is the scientific method, what is the information that the scientific method provides and what it proves, And as we see, what the scientific method has proven is that indeed it is true that climate change is man-made. So this guy Patrick Moore has been co-opted. He's a fraud who left Greenpeace because he saw an opportunity to make a shit ton of cash. And that's why he's gone. That's the reality of the situation.